Hello everybody. Welcome back to another Books and Looks video. If you are new here, hello. Thank you for watching my videos. I'm Jen and I put my makeup on while I talk about a book I have recently read. Those of you who already know my videos, thank you so much for watching more. Today, I'm going to be talking about 2 Degrees by Alan Gratz. Alan Gratz is a middle grade author. Most of his books are geared towards late elementary through middle school age range. But honestly, I read it, I loved it, and I thoroughly recommend it to anybody who wants a light but interesting and very action-packed book. It's pretty intense emotionally, but it's pretty on par with, that age range, upper elementary through middle school. It's a story about climate change. If you're familiar with Alan Gratz, his stories always are in that age range and are always about some important thing. So he has this book. He has another book called Ground Zero that is about 9/11. He has another book called Refugee that is about refugees. What's another interesting thing that's Alan Gratz style is all of his books tell multiple stories at once that overlap or have something in common or come together in some way at the end. So without much further ado, let me tell you about 2 Degrees and put my makeup on at the same time. So, 2 Degrees by Alan Gratz takes place relatively recently. It's in present day. I want to say it was published in 2018, but I could be totally wrong. It might be more recently than that. It's one of his newer novels, but his newest is, I believe, Ground Zero. So it's at least a year or 2 old, maybe a little more. But it takes place in modern day. And there's 3 different stories that are told. One of a girl named Akira in California, and she is fleeing a California wildfire. It's tough. All of the stories are very tough and difficult situations, but I digress. The second story is about a boy, Owen, and his best friend, George. They live in Manitoba, Canada, and they are dealing with the ice cap melting and polar bears basically infiltrating their town because the polar bear's natural habitat is no longer available to them because of the ice caps melting. The third story is about a girl named Natalie who is in Miami, Florida, and is facing the big one, hurricane. Hurricanes are very common in Florida, but as the climate change issues progress, the hurricanes are getting more often and much more severe. So these 3 stories are talking about big, problematic situations that are stemming directly from climate change and how it is affecting everywhere all over the world. So I'll tell the 3 stories separately, but the way Alan Gratz organizes his stories is he tells one chapter from each person over and over in a pattern. So chapter 1 is Akira, chapter 2 is George and Owen, chapter 3 is Natalie, and then it cycles through them as it goes through everybody's story. And what I like about Alan Gratz in particular is each trio of stories has some common thread. Like it will be, the introduction, and then there'll be a part where, a secondary character dies in all 3 stories. So like these 3 stories and 3 narrators are basically experiencing the same thing in the same pattern, which, I'm a good fan of parallelism in writing. So Alan Gratz does that really well. In this story, though, the three narrators, like I said, it goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But I'm just going to focus on each story individually as I tell it, rather than jumping around. They do all come together very nicely in the end as well, so that'll be fun. You'll see when I get to that point. Because this story is about climate change and the earth and taking care of the earth, I'm going to do browns for earth, because earth is brown. So, which I think is kind of fun, because I did a fire one for Fahrenheit, 451, and then I did a water one with the Johnstown Girls. So now I'm doing an earth one. Wonder if I can do something wind themed. I'm not sure of any wind-themed books, but I'll see if I can find one. If you know of any good wind-themed books, put it in the comment below so I can read it and finish out all of the elements. But anyway, so the first story that comes up in this book is Akira's story. She is in California, and she and her father, it starts out, they are going on a little horseback ride together through the woods. They realize that there are wildfires, but they live in wildfire country, so they are very well prepared. They know what to do. This is pretty normal for them. As a matter of fact, her father is kind of like, not anti-climate change, but he doesn't believe that humans, are causing it or making it worse. He views it as like, this is just the Earth's way of, growing pains, or like, it's a good thing. It destroys the dead thing so that new life can grow. And while that's true, that wildfires definitely do have some positive elements to the Earth, Akira recognizes that it's very problematic, and they're getting worse, and they're getting bigger, and they are harder to manage. And she's studying it and recognizes, she's like 12 or 13, 14, somewhere in that range. So, they're taking a little horseback ride through the woods, and they run into a wildfire, and suddenly it grows very suddenly and gets really bad really fast. So, they're on horses, so they realize that they're kind of trapped. And in the meantime, shortly before they found the wildfire, this is actually important, sorry, I skipped it. They run into two people, Sue and her father, David, and they are new to the area. They're not super familiar with wildfires. They're just like exploring their new neighborhood and their new area. And so when the wildfire hits, they don't really know what to do. So Akira and her father, I think his name was Lars, something like that, they decide to help Sue and David escape. So they jump on their horses, they, put them on their horses, and then they make it back to the parking area, and they get in Sue and David's car because they need to get out of there fast. Akira's all upset, like, what about the horses? And Dad's like, they'll be fine. They'll find their way through. Horses are smart. So she's very upset about that, but you do what you got to do, right? Well, on their drive home, they see like, oh my gosh, this fire is really bad. It's everywhere. There's so much destruction. There's like cars on the side of the road that are completely burned, nothing left, with people in it completely burned and destroyed. And the girls are like terrified and freaking out. The parents are terrified and freaking out. And at one point, they get in a car accident. Sue dislocates her shoulder. There's some cuts and bruises, but generally they're okay. But the other people are really hurt. So Lars and David decide to stay and help these people who are really hurt. And the other girls are like, the parents tell the girls, like, you need to go. Akira knows her way home from here, so just get to the house. Your mother's there with your baby sister. Hurry up, get there as fast as you can. So they head their way. And then on their way, they get trapped a couple of times. They lose their way a couple of times, but they eventually find the horses, well, at least one of the horses. Oh, I remember. They come to a house. And so they go in the house and they start to, not raid it, but they get some food. They drink some water. They pack up a backpack with fresh supplies because they don't know how long it's going to be till, what's going to happen, etc. So they do all that, and then they notice in the backyard is her horse stuck in the pool. So he must have been running, and he fell into the pool. So they rescue the horse from the pool, and now they have a ride. So they jump on the horse and they start riding to try to get home as quickly as possible. Along the way, they find a woman in a truck. And since Sue is hurt, the lady decides to take Sue to the hospital because she has a running vehicle. They can get out faster. But Akira refuses to leave her horse. So now Akira is by herself. She's literally running through the wildfire. She has burns on her, etc. It's a very scary, dire situation. Some different things happen. At one point, she climbs a tree to figure out where she is, and she recognizes or notices that like the fire is huge. It's like everywhere her eye can see. So she's freaking out, but she does see where she is and where to go to get home. So she makes her way home finally. And in the meantime, her father has also gotten home. The old people that was in the other car accident, they're okay. And then they eventually find out that Sue did make it to the hospital and she's okay. So even though Sue's okay and everybody made it home, the fire is like right there, like literally in their backyard. They have a fireproof house because they're in California, made of cinder block. So the fire like is unlikely to come into their house, but they still need to get away. So they decide to jump on their horses. The other horse did make it home because there's a lake like a mile away. So they jump on the horses and they literally are running through the wildfire to try to get to the lake so that they can get, be in the lake where there's water and be safe from the fire, theoretically. They make it just barely. They literally have to run through the fire. They all have burns. It's very scary, but they make it, and then they're like in the water, and a helicopter shows up. I think it was a helicopter. Yes, a helicopter shows up, a rescue helicopter, and they all get rescued, including the horses, and they go to the hospital, and everybody's relatively okay. So that's the end of Akira's story. She survived the wildfires. It was scary. They all almost died multiple times, but they made it. And this whole time she's arguing with her dad, like, see, this is serious, like climate change, and he's just like, this is fine, this is normal, like everything's gonna be fine. And like he almost didn't want to leave the house. He's like, it's gonna be fine, our house is fireproof, blah 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 blah. But yeah, they were fine. They lost their house, but they all survived. So that was that story. The next story is Owen and his best friend George in Canada, Manitoba, Canada, and their livelihood up there, like this tiny town. And in normal life up there, polar bear season. So the ice caps always melt in the summer, and then they move into the town. This is Canada, so it's always cold. They basically move into town, and they kind of have an agreement with the bears, and the bears sometimes attack people, like they've been known to attack people, but they figured out how to make it like a tourist, like it's their economy. So wait, I want to put on some sparkles. They use this to their advantage, and Owen's family owns a business that basically takes people on bus rides through the tundra, the icy tundra, to see the polar bears. And they've been noticing over the past few years that this season has been lasting longer and longer because the rising temperature of the earth is making it so, hold on one second. Okay, is making it so that the normal thing is, in the summer when the ice melts, the polar bears can't hunt for seals out on the ice, so they come into the towns for that time being, and then once everything freezes again, they go back to their regular territory. But because of the climate change, the ice isn't coming back as early, and it's also like it's staying melted longer, so the polar bears are in town longer. And at first, Owen's like, this is good for business. Like, we can continue with our tourist stuff for even longer, and our family is doing really well financially because the polar bears are here longer. So he doesn't really recognize it, but George sees it for what it is and is like, this isn't good. Like, the polar bears aren't, experiencing life. They're starving. It's not good. The dens are like collapsing because the ice is melting and they're not as secure, which means the polar bears aren't going to find a place to hibernate or have their cubs. So like they're going to eventually go extinct. He's recognizing how awful it is. So the boys go away for a weekend. They decide they're going to go to this little fishing cabin and go fishing for the weekend. They're like teenagers, like 14-ish. And so they go on their snowmobile several miles away. They've done it before. So like they have all their equipment and stuff. And their parents are like, all right, call us when you get there. So they go along their way and they make a pit stop to go to the bathroom. And of course, a polar bear attacks them. And what is that? Seem to have a weird mark there. Okay. Anyway, a polar bear attacks them. It hits George first, and George gets hit in the head and knocked out, and he has a big gash on his head. So he's bleeding. His head is bleeding. So this is serious. And Owen, trying to figure out like what to do, he scares the bear away to save George, but then the bear comes and attacks him and bites him on his leg. So now he has like holes in his leg from a bear bite, and he somehow, I don't remember how, George wakes up and runs to the snowmobile and gets the shotgun with blanks in it and shoots one, and it scares the bear away. So they jump on the snowmobile and are like running away from the bear. The bear's chasing them. They don't know it, but the bear's chasing them. And they just like blindly run. Unbeknownst to them, they ran right into the middle of a frozen over lake. But because of the rising temperatures of the earth, it is not super frozen. So the polar bear follows them onto the lake and basically comes at them. But I don't remember why, but they got off the snowmobile and run. Did it stall? Because they were pushing it really slowly because they were worried about the lake. And then the bear comes and kind of surprises them, catches them off guard. And so they have to like run because the bear is coming for them. And luckily the bear actually attacks the snowmobile because they have food in their snowmobile. But that doesn't bode very well because now the lake cracks and the snowmobile and the bear fall into the lake. But polar bears can swim, so it doesn't bother the polar bear. And now the boys are injured, being chased by a polar bear. They lost their mode of transportation, all their food, all like their cell phone, everything at the bottom of the lake. So they run and they luckily come across like a little shack or something that they go into, and they hide in there for a while. And then the sun goes down, which is bad. But eventually the polar bear, as they can tell, the polar bear goes away, at least temporarily. So they leave this place because they need to get home. They need to get healthcare. They need to get safety. So they run, or as fast as they can go. And then eventually they're almost to town. And they're like, oh, cool, we're only a few miles from home. So they get like a second wind. But then the polar bear comes back. Surprise, surprise. Who didn't see that coming? And they don't know what to do. And then they see this giant like tube thing that Owen recognizes as a bear trap. So in this area, there's so many bears, they have bear traps. And it's like this giant tube with like a grate on one end and then like a door where as soon as the bear comes in to get the food that's inside, it closes on them. And then they would like trank the bear and then take it off somewhere more secure. So the boys, not knowing what to do, run in there and set the trap so that they are secure from the bear. But now they're trapped in the bear trap in freezing cold temperatures, injured, etc. So they don't know what to do. Eventually, again, the bear wanders away and they notice there's like a little trap door on the side that's not very large, but big enough for two tween boys to escape out of. So they get out, and luckily for them, at this point, the rescue chopper shows up because their parents called in for a search and rescue and they didn't check in. Luckily, you know, parents love us and stuff and do that. So they end up getting rescued. The rescue people tranquilize the bear, save them. But while the bear's tranquilized, it like wanders into a little lake and they're worried that it's going to drown. So the boys actually go and help it, even though it's like passed out. They hold his giant bear head out of the water and save its life. So that's kind of like a sweet thing. Even though the bear tried to eat them, they were still like, this is nature and this is how it works. And we're the reason that the bear isn't in his own territory and is instead in our town looking for food. So the least we can do is take care of it the best we can. So it was nice. Like the boys came to an understanding of all that. So that's how the boys' story ended. They almost died multiple times, but they made it. So also the third story then is Natalie. She is in Miami, Florida, and it's hurricanes. And it's after hurricane season, so it's like late in the year. And she's thinking like, oh my gosh, this new hurricane is coming. I can't believe it. It's like not even hurricane season anymore. And she has been studying weather, like she's super interested in it. She's like 12, I think. And she realizes that it's global warming that is causing the hurricanes to happen later and later. And like hurricane season is getting bigger and bigger. And they're also getting worse and worse, like bigger and last longer every year. And she's like, this is climate change. Like she recognizes this. So if you notice, every character has something, or every story has a character that is recognizing the climate change and one character who's not. So her mother is like, it's fine. They say every hurricane's the big one. We're, you know, like, let's just do what we normally do. They can't go anywhere. So what they end up doing is just like boarding up their house and, you know, setting up flashlights and stuff, doing everything they can to endure the hurricane. Well, the hurricane hits, and as Natalie predicted, it is much worse than they have been in the past. It is much bigger. So it's her, her mom, and her next door neighbor, a little old lady. They're like in the house surviving. The hurricane hits, and it is so intense that it actually rips part of their house, like half their house gets ripped away. And then like all the water comes in and the wind and the rain, and it's a hurricane. So Natalie actually gets swept away. She gets swept into the hurricane, and her mom and her neighbor, Beatrix, or whatever her name, Beatrice something, they are trapped in the house, and she gets washed away. So she's alone trying to survive the hurricane out in the middle of the streets, and like she gets hit by like a stove or something and then clings onto that for a while, and then she ends up on a second floor balcony because the waters and stuff are so bad. She's like up on the second floor, and she barely survives. Okay. Barely survives, but she does. So she's here. Oh, and when she was on the second floor, this family was like, come in, we're going to save you, like climbed in her window. But then the second floor gets flooded, so they go up onto the roof, and then it starts coming up on the roof again, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. Luckily, a boat comes by, so she and this whole family, that like random strangers that are just like, oh my gosh, this girl, we need to help her. They all climb on this boat because they're on the roof and the water's still rising and the hurricane's coming. So they all climb on this boat, and they're like, okay, we're on a boat. We should be okay. But the boat ends up hitting something because everything's destroyed and like there's just stuff all through the water. So the boat starts sinking, and they all try to jump out onto like some other, I don't remember where they're on top of a building or something. But everybody escapes. Oh, I remember what happens. The eye of the storm comes. So they actually have a little bit of a reprieve from the storm, but it doesn't last very long. So almost everybody gets off the boat in this time into like a safe place, but Natalie doesn't. She barely makes it, and she gets swept away when the storm's right when the storm starts up again. But she makes it instead to this other apartment building that this woman, Patience, lives in. And Patience had stepped outside during the eye of the storm too, and like saw the storm coming and saw what was happening with Natalie, like across the street or whatever it was. And she basically saves Natalie and brings her into her house, and then like shuts the metal thing on her window that she had in place to protect her from hurricanes. So now Natalie is saved, and she's in Patience's apartment. She's fine. She's secure. It's all good. And then the storm finally ends. And as it turns out, Patience runs a food bank, a health place that helps people. So when the storm's over, she's like, I gotta go and I gotta open this up because everybody's gonna need help right now. So Natalie goes with her and starts helping her with all this stuff. And basically, even though she's terrified and she's hurt and she doesn't even know if her mother is alive or anything, she does what she can. As it turns out, her mother is fine, but her neighbor, the little old lady, she died. So each story had somebody who died with like a smaller character, and each of the narrators like barely survived. So that's how Natalie's story ends. So, those are the 3 stories. And then it has a little epilogue that's like 6 months later, 9 months later. And all of the kids have come to Washington, D.C. for a rally, a climate change rally, to like get the government to make laws and changes and stuff for, you know, promoting positive climate change and, you know, recycling and all that stuff. And each of them are giving a little speech about what they experienced, the wildfire, the polar bears, etc. And while they're there, they kind of became friends, and then they slowly realized the connections that they all have. So, for example, Patience, who helped Natalie, used to live in California and used to be Akira's babysitter. So Akira's like, oh my gosh, Patience, I haven't seen you in years since you moved away. And she's like, oh, hi, how are you? I heard about your trouble with the wildfire. I'm so glad to hear you're okay, blah, blah, blah. And then Sue, the girl that Akira became friends with and survived the wildfire with, she came here from California. She came to California from Canada, and the boys knew her. She used to live there, and she was attacked by a polar bear, and her parents were like, that's it, we're out of here, and moved to California only to be trapped in a wildfire. So, and then the boys have this woman who comes to their thing every year for tourist season and does like this video thing on the polar bears. And she's a, what is that? That was my hair. She is a weather lady named Maria Martinez, who is based in Miami and who Natalie loves and is like the reason she got so into weather and studying hurricanes and stuff, because of this weather lady. So like, it's the same weather lady that they knew. So like, there's all these interconnections. And it was really cute because these kids are like really pumped about making a difference in the world, and they all become really good friends. And the story has a really good moral about, you know, this stuff's important and we need to take care of our earth, and this isn't a joke. And like all of these, you might think like, oh, it's just a hurricane. Well, yeah, it's just a hurricane there, but then there's the wildfire there, and there's the flooding there, and there's the polar bears are starving here, and there's earthquakes there, and like all this stuff is happening. So that's what I love about the story is, number one, it's digestible and it's impactful and powerful, but it's also told in a way that is not frightening. I mean, it's scary, but it's not like the kids who read it are going to be traumatized. Their eyes are going to be open, and they're going to, you know, hopefully be interested and do something about it. And then it's also just, it tells a good story. It has good characters. I loved it. I would probably give it, I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10. It was fast paced. Excuse me. It was fast paced. It had cliffhangers at the end of each chapter that made you want to read more. Like I said, I really like the parallelism between the different narratives and how they were similar but unique. I loved the moral of the story. I loved the interconnection between the stories. Is very well written. Each chapter was short, so if you're not an avid reader, it's easy to digest. It's easy to read. You feel progressive while you're reading it. Highly recommend it. Even if you're an adult, like, it's a good story. You should read it. It's a powerful story. So I don't think I want that color. I highly recommend it. 10 out of 10. And yeah, that's how the story ends. I hope you are interested and maybe want to read it. If you already have, I'd love to hear what you think about it. And if you haven't read it, do you think you will? So yeah, that's the end of my story. That's the end of my book. And I believe I finished my look, my earthy eyeshadow, my nude lipstick. So yeah, that's the end. If you've read this story, please let me know. If you have any other books that you think I might like to read, very open to new ideas. Like I said, I was kind of hoping to find a wind-themed book so I can go with my 4 elements. If you know a good story that has something to do with wind, I'd love to hear it. Maybe I'll give it a read. Keep watching on future videos and see if any of your recommendations are ones that I end up talking about. And this is my look. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you think it's pretty, and maybe one day you want to give it a try for yourself. It's a pretty neutral look that I think would look good on everybody. So have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Thank you so much for watching. And as usual, stay beautiful inside and out. Thanks.